Do open session 20 next weekend. And then after that, I'm going to jump back to the weekend CW Jaw Talk shows. Try to catch us up to number 50. I've got a number of items I'm looking forward to discussing with everybody. So I thank you for joining me today. And we have that to look forward to next week and the weeks thereafter. Let me just get a couple things set up here. And then, usually on these open sessions, if you go back and look at the history of open session, there's a playlist on the channel. I start out with a topic, or two, and then we just sort of would talk about it. And I would try to integrate the chat with the topic. Sometimes I would just deal with the chat, but the last couple of shows, I've mainly dealt with chat topics. And today I'm going to be dealing in large part with the chat as well, but I'm going to start out with just a couple topics I want to discuss with you all, and then we'll go right into the chat, and you can either talk about what I'm going to discuss in a moment, or you can bring up whatever you want, and then I'll relabel the chat. I'm going to relabel open session 17, kind of like the way I relabeled open session 18. So instead of in open session 17, the title being who's in the chat, I'll just go back and I'm going to relabel it according to the topics that we discussed. And then like today's open session title and more from the chat, I'll add that. I'll add a couple of the key subjects that come up so that you can kind of better sort through the different chats and kind of get a better idea of what's discussed in them. I think that's a better way to go about ultimately labeling these open session shows. Although initially I might just do like a general description, right? Chat, or who's in the chat and stuff like that. Miroslav. Very nice to see you. I hope you're doing well. Dennis Wilczek, I believe. Again, those 4 consonants, Dennis. I bet you've heard a lot of pronunciations of your name, haven't you? Hopefully I'm close. Feel free to give us a phonetic breakdown in the chat. But that SZCZ isn't something I encounter very frequently. So we'll give people a few minutes to join the chat, and then I'm going to go into a couple topics. We're going to talk about Jesus' physical body, what happened to it, where did it go? And then we're going to discuss the question of, since the Bible teaches, like in Romans chapter 6, we'll read a couple texts from it. Since the Bible teaches that when you die, that's the wages you pay for your sin, right? Death. And then it even says that he who dies has been acquitted from his sins. So how is it then that you can be judged after that? Because Jesus and Paul and John in Revelation describe a judgment, a resurrection, and then a judgment for those who did good things and those who did bad things. So if your sin acquits you from, if death acquits you from sin, what's the judgment for, right? How does that work in relation to the death that paid the sins that you did during your life? We're going to talk about it. I'm going to explain it because I've heard some really whacked out explanations and people that just don't take the Bible seriously. They pretend like they do, but they don't. And they throw out these just really stupid questions, like usual, right? I mean, we get them all the time, we know. People that just don't think through the texts or what they're thinking. And they're just looking for an excuse to criticize somebody, some group, or the Bible. And so we get just these whacked out comments and explanations or videos, videos where people pretend like they understand what they're talking about. And they don't. So I'm going to explain how when it comes to that subject of the wages that sin pays is death, and how there can be a judgment thereafter, a resurrection after, and a judgment again. how that all works out and how it's very clearly explained in the Bible. If people would just take the time to try to understand it, right? And I know that's a tall order for many people, right? We get it for people who believe in the Bible. And I'm talking about people that really don't. But there are some people who believe in the Bible, right? They're just fanatic about the Bible. And like we saw last week, they can't even figure out John 8:58. Right? It's like the most simple verse of all time, possibly. Maybe John 1:1. But they've blown both of them, right? Most people have. The Trinitarians can't figure out how to translate John 8:58. They can't figure out how to interpret it because they mistranslate it. Then you get the Socinians that just, from top to bottom, collapse, right? They have their doctrine that tells them Jesus can't pre-exist, and so it can mean anything but that. Pink Moon, good to see you. Let's see if we get purple rain. If we get purple rain, now that we have pink moon, then we know we have an interesting color scheme once again, at least where it concerns astrological bodies and the atmospheric conditions that we could conceive of in that light, right? A pink moon, purple rain. Like I said last week, I think that'd be kind of interesting. So, all right, let's get into this subject now. Okay, but before we get to the whole wages that sin pays is death question in relation to the resurrection, what happened to Jesus' body? You had people ask you that, especially like Trinitarians, and I guess Socinians too, right? People who believe that Jesus still has his body in heaven, his physical, human body, that he's a man, he's a God-man, even though no text in the Bible says he's a God-man. Doesn't say he's homoousios with the Father and the Holy Spirit either, but they believe that, so who cares, right? What do we say? What do you say when people ask you, what happened to Jesus' body? Right? We know that in Watchtower literature, and maybe you yourself and I have at times said that it was given in sacrifice to the Father. So it was, however handled in that way, maybe dissolved. I think one Watchtower publication says dissolved into gases, right? Or just dematerialized. Those aren't really stated that way. It's not really stated that way in the Bible, though, is it? So while that's possible, it's not really inconsistent with anything in the Bible. Because as we've talked about in numerous videos, Jesus appeared as a man after being raised to life as a spirit to show his disciples that he was really still alive. I mean, we had disciples openly questioning, like Thomas, unless I see the imprint in the hands and in the feet, I won't believe. So he had very clear reason why he manifested the body with wound marks at that time. But is it just a manifestation of that body? Well, we know, as I've discussed, again, videos, I've got a whole playlist on it, that he appeared in more than one body. And we're going to see that again in a moment. They didn't even recognize him many times, right? Mary thought he was the gardener. And she heard his voice and saw him. And it wasn't until he spoke to her in a very specific way that she recognized him. So either way, what happened to the body? We know he was raised a life-giving spirit. We know that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, which is the kingdom of the heavens, right? It's not talking about the kingdom on the new earth that humans inherit at the judgment where Jesus arrives and they go through the great tribulation, the nations, as we're going to see further also in our reading, that even Satan comes out after his 1,000 years of imprisonment and misleads in part. He says he misleads the nations. And it calls them mankind, even after that. The ones who are on the new earth in Revelation 21. We'll read that too. So when Paul's writing in 1 Corinthians 15, though, he's not talking about those humans. Those are non-Christians who are approved by Jesus when he comes and separates the sheep from the goats. And then they wash their robes and make them white in the blood of the Lamb. And then they are on the earth, the ones over whom Jesus and those with him on his Father's throne, Revelation chapters 2 and 3, rule over and guide to fountains of waters of life, right? It says in Revelation that the leaves from the trees of trees of life are for the healing of the nations. So they're still healing while they're being ruled over by Christians. Okay, so when Paul's writing to Christians in 1 Corinthians 15, he's not talking about them as those nations. Right? They're taken out from all those nations as the symbolic 144,000. At least that's how I see it. I did a whole video on it. Take a look at it. But it fits with everything that's written in the New Testament. And so he's not talking about the earthly people. He's talking about the Christians who are going to rule with Jesus on his Father's throne in the heavens. So people often confuse it. Well, they'll say, well, don't you believe people are going to live on the earth forever? Yeah, but that's the people over whom people in the heavens are ruling. So Paul's not talking about them when he's talking about the Christians whom he is one of, inheriting the kingdom in terms of ruling with the Christ. So let's now talk about that body, though. What happens to Jesus' body? Right, so he's raised the life-giving spirit, and then he appears on earth in that body that he died in. Right, it's raised up after 3 days before it sees corruption. And then he appears in that body and in other bodies to the disciples, to his followers. And then he ascends to the Father to sit at the Father's right hand, so his enemies are placed as a stool for his feet. So what happens to his body at that point? Well, again, some of us would just say it's given in sacrifice to God the Father, which is what the book of Hebrews says. But what happens to it? Is it just dissolved, like we read in Watchtower literature and like some of us may have described in the past? And if so, how do we answer that biblically? Right? How do we answer it according to the Bible? Do we have to answer every single question dealing with metaphysics and even the physics of Jesus, where it concerns what happens to his physical body after he ascends to the heavens? I don't think we do, right? It's not explained for us in the Bible. So if we're not told what happened to it, why would we have to have an answer? We don't. But can we come up with something that explains it in light of something else? We can. Let's go to Genesis chapter 18. Let me bring you guys up with the NWT. Looks like it's all on the screen right there. And let me just change one thing real quickly so I can see all the chat. There we go. Good to see you, Ryan. All right, so how can we explain using another account in the Bible, or just another situation, other beings, what happened to Jesus' physical body after he ascended to the Father, beyond just explaining that it's given in sacrifice to God? Genesis 18. Let's read verses 1 through 16, and then we're going to go to Luke chapter 24 and read an account involving Jesus' post-resurrection appearance in a physical body. Verse 1, afterward, Jehovah appeared to him among the big trees of Mamre. It's talking about Abraham. While he was sitting at the entrance of the tent about the heat of the day. When he raised his eyes, then he looked, he's talking about Abraham, and there 3 men, he calls them men, right? And we've talked about how Trinitarians and others love to point to texts in the Bible, like 1 Timothy 2:5, and say, well, it says he's a man, one mediator between God and men, a man, right? But it doesn't say a God-man. And it's referring to him, according to the very next verse, as a man when he gave his life as a man. The historical sense. I did a whole video on it. It's on the front page of the channel, or in the playlist on the resurrection body of Jesus. So here, though, it says 3 men. So this is how Abraham sees these beings. 3 men were standing some distance from him. When he caught sight of them, he began running to meet them from the entrance of the tent and proceeded to bow down to the earth. Then he said, Jehovah, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. And again, I'm not going to get off into the whole account about why he calls them Jehovah. I've done several videos about how the angels, over and over and over and over again, represent their Father, from speaking to Moses in the burning bush, from giving him the law, from guiding the Israelites through the wilderness, all of it. And there are times when Jehovah specifically says, I'm sending my angel, listen to him, my name's within him, and then thereafter that angel speaks as him. They are the Father to us, here and everywhere, except when they do their own thing, like Satan in the Garden of Eden, right? Or when they're gods appointed over the nations to do over their own will. But that's the way Jehovah allows it to be set up, so that in this condition of the earth that we find ourselves in post-Eden, he can bring through his chosen people the seed that he promised. And so that's why he appointed Michael over the Israelites. His son, I believe, his firstborn, the one who would oversee the development of his own body. And Jesus speaks that way and is identified as that angel in the New Testament, I believe, pretty clearly. And the archangel, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, right? I don't think it could get much more explicit, maybe a little more explicit, but it's pretty clear he descends with the voice of the archangel. I did a whole video on that too, showing the expression that is used always means that the voice in which the person is described is the voice of that person. So it's his voice. He has the voice of the archangel. That voice is raising the dead, as we're going to see when we get to John chapter 5. But that's in our next initial subject discussion. Back to this account. So if you want to know more about how the angels represent God, how they speak as God, how they're talked to as if they are God, even Jehovah, all you have to do is look at my videos regarding the different texts involved with these angels, and you'll see the many accounts where this is explicitly described. And I would argue even here, although in this account it refers to them as men. So I just want to make that note clear so people don't get distracted by it. You can watch my videos about that subject. I've done several of them, about how the angels are often referred to as God and as Jehovah. So that's what Abraham does here. He says, Jehovah, if now I found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be taken, please, and you must have your feet washed. Then recline under the tree. All right, so these men have feet, right? Feet that can be washed. So they'd have to have flesh and bone, wouldn't they? Of course. Verse 5, and let me get a piece of bread and refresh your hearts. Following that, you can pass on, because that is why you have passed this way to your servant. At this, they, right, the three men, at this they said, all right, you may do just as you have spoken. So he's going to wash their feet, and he's going to give them some food. And they're called men. Verse 6, so Abraham went hurrying to the tent to Sarah and said, hurry, get 3 seah measures of fine flour, knead the dough, and make round cakes. Verse 7, next Abraham ran to the herd and proceeded to get a tender and good young bull and give it to the attendant, and he went hurrying to get it ready. Verse 8, he then took butter and milk and the young bull that he had got ready and set it before them, right? The 3 men, whom he refers to as Jehovah, and who agree to have a meal with him. And he says, then he himself kept standing by them under the tree as they were eating. All right, so we have 3 angels here, 3 men they're called, but they're representing Jehovah. And the account goes on, right? It goes on to describe them in relation to Abraham, in relation to Lot, as the angels that help save Lot and his family. So it's pretty clear these are angels here. But he calls them men because that's how they're appearing to him. That's what they are. Right? At this point, are they spirits? No, right? How could they be? It's not that they're not able to return to spirit form. They have become men. Not in the sense that Jesus ultimately did in being born a man, but in the sense in which they can take on a physical form. The same way that Satan took on the form of a serpent. And that Jesus did later, as we're going to see in a moment, after his resurrection as a spirit. But they're men here, right? I mean, he's talking, he sees them as men. He's going to wash their feet, right? So he's going to feel their feet. He's making them food. They agree to eat, and they go to eating. They consume the food. They chew it, eat it, and then, drink. It says milk and butter and a young bull and round cakes. And they agree, right? All right, you may do as you have spoken. And then they go in, they sit with him, and they start eating. Are they spirits? No. No, because as we're going to see in a moment, spirits don't have flesh and bone. They're spirits who became men. So they're men here. That doesn't mean they're subject to the same infirmities and they don't have special power. But they're manifested as men, not as spirits. They're not a phantom type thing or a demon that's inhabiting the form of something else, right? Like the pigs or like the humans in the New Testament that go nuts. They're themselves as men. They're not possessing actual humans and then using those humans that they're possessing to eat. They're themselves as men. Verse 9, they now said to him, to Abraham, "Where is Sarah your wife?" To this he said, "Here in the tent." So he continued, "I'm surely going to return to you next year at this time." So one of the three is taking the lead and speaking to him. "And look, Sarah your wife will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the tent entrance, and it was behind the man who was speaking, one of the three who are representing Jehovah here, whom the context of Genesis 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 shows are angels. "And Abraham and Sarah were old, being advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having menstruation. Hence Sarah began to laugh inside herself, saying, 'After I am worn out, shall I really have pleasure, my Lord being old besides?' Then Jehovah said to Abraham, 'Why was it that Sarah laughed, saying, shall I really and truly give birth, although I have become old?'" Right? So Jehovah, he's there through these angels, aware of everything going on. Just like he was when his son was there, right, on the earth. He's always aware. He's always there and can see what's going on. He can hear what's going on. He can listen to your heart. He can listen to your mind, your thoughts in your head. She didn't even speak them out loud, right? So Jehovah then speaks through these angels and says this to him. And in verse 14, "Is there anything too extraordinary for Jehovah? At the appointed time I shall return to you next year at this time, and Sarah will have a son." Verse 15, "But Sarah began to deny it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid." At this he said, "No, but you did laugh." Right? He understands, right? Jehovah, through his angels, is very understanding. He knows she's lying, but she's kind of caught off guard and is afraid. So it's not the same thing as someone who's being deceitful in a bad way. Not that you ever want to be deceitful, but she's just been caught off guard. She's been caught in a tough spot, as I'm sure we can all appreciate, thinking inside herself ways that are doubtful towards the manifestation of Jehovah's power, that now she's being uncovered in front of everybody over. Verse 16, "Later the men got up from there and looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to escort them." Right? So they're called men several times. And their feet are washed. They eat food with Abraham. So they're human beings at this point, not sinful. They're not fully born humans like you and I or Jesus eventually came to be. They're fully manifested human beings. They're not spirits possessing another man. They are the men that they have manifested themselves to be in physical form. What happened to their bodies? What happened to their bodies? Did these angels never go back to the spirit realm? Did they take their human flesh back to the spirit realm? No, we know that's not how they're described when they're in the spirit realm. We're going to read that in a little bit, Daniel chapter 10, in comparison with Revelation 1. They're totally different. They're spirits, flames of fire. What happened to their bodies? Every single time you are asked by anyone, well, what happened to Jesus' body? If he was raised as a life-giving spirit, the way the Bible actually says, and then just manifested his human self in different forms and in his executed form to his disciples to prove he was no longer dead, what happened to his body? The same thing that happened to these angels' body. We don't know, but guess what? They're able to manifest as fully human. So that you look at them and you see a man, you can wash their feet, you can make food for them and they will go and eat, and then they can go back to the spirit realm. Do we have to know what happened to these angels' bodies? The ones that were eating this food with Abraham? No. We're not that power. We're not aware of those mechanisms of manifestation and returning to your original state. We don't know how to do that. We're not in that state. Right? We're not in a situation where we understand how that works. So, we don't know what happened to the body, but it's the same thing, most likely, or at least this would be how I would explain it, that happened to these angels' body. And many Trinitarians believe this is, in fact, the Trinity here. This is the Son, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So even they would believe that they manifested a human form and then returned to the Spirit. And so they already have come to an understanding of or acceptance that Jesus had a physical body or could manifest a physical body and then return to the Spirit. But they don't have to answer what happened to that body, right? Nobody does. Why do we have to answer that? We're not in a position to know how that works. We just know that it works because it's described in the Bible, not only for Jesus, but for angels who existed thousands of years before he became a man, was raised as a life-giving spirit, and then as a spirit took on the form of a man, just like these spirits. I think I saw your question, Daniel, before you retracted it, which is fine if you want to retract it. It wasn't anything bad, I can see. Maybe, right? Maybe they're able to create bodies from the dust and manifest themselves as fully functional humans. And then when they're done, they return those bodies to the dust and go back to the Spirit. And then they just do that as often as they need to whenever they become human. But the fact is, what I'm getting at is, we know they already did what we're going to read in just a second Jesus did after he was resurrected as a spirit. So it doesn't change anything. It no more means he's still fully a man than it means these angels are still fully human. Or if the Trinitarians want this to be the Trinity, then that the Trinity is fully human. It doesn't work no matter what. Because they're fully human here. It's very obvious. They're eating. They're seen as men. They can be touched, right? They can be washed. But that doesn't require them to retain their humanity when they go back to heaven. So, we need to remember that. You need to remember this account. And sometimes we usually do when it comes to, showing that he was eating, like we're going to see. Let's go to that right now, Luke 24. But you need to remember this because it's very important. I think it shows clearly we don't have to explain it, number one, because it's beyond our ability to understand mechanically. exactly the process that takes place, or how are we supposed to explain that? we don't have that awareness. And Jehovah hasn't told us, well, this is how we manifest, and this is how we dematerialize and all that stuff, right? But they want to force us to answer something that we can't answer, because in their mind, it then means that he still has to be a human, when it does not. Not only does the Bible clearly show he's not a human, not only does the Bible clearly state he's not human. Galatians 1:1, 11 through 12. Explicit. These angels who weren't human and became human didn't have to remain human. So their argument falls flat by biblical example. Let's go to Luke 24 to cap off this initial topic with the account involving Jesus. Let's read Luke 24. Well, let's read verses 13 through 43. First, before that, let's talk about Peter rising, going to the memorial tomb. He's looking in. He beholds just the bandages, so he goes off wondering what happened. And then it says, but look, on that very day, 2 of them were journeying to a village about 7 miles distant from Jerusalem and named Emmaus. Verse 14, then they were conversing with each other over all these things that had come about. Verse 15, now they were conversing and discussing. Now, as they were conversing and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began walking with them. Remember the way it's described. He approaches, right? So he walks up to them and then starts walking with them. It says, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Now, sometimes Trinitarians and others will say, well, something was done to prevent them from seeing him, but it was really the way he always was. Same one who died, same body in which he died. Yeah, but there's 2 problems with that. Number one, it doesn't say their ears were kept from recognizing him. Right? So wouldn't they be able to tell based on his voice? I think so, because he talks to him quite a bit, as I'm going to show, as the text show. And it could just be that because he's in a different body, that's how their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They couldn't determine it was him because it didn't look like him. But it doesn't say their ears were kept from recognizing him. So there clearly wasn't this spiritual condition put on them that blocked all of their senses and prevented them from seeing him and understanding it was him in any sense. Verse 17, he, that is Jesus, said to them, what are these matters that you are debating between yourselves as you walk along? As they stood still with sad faces. And they stood still with sad faces. Verse 18, in answer, the one named Cleopas said to him, are you dwelling as an alien by yourself in Jerusalem, and so you do not know the things that have occurred in her in these days? Verse 19, and he said to them, what things? This is Jesus talking to them. Right? So they can hear his voice. But it's not his voice. He's in a different body, is why I believe. Right? It's different vocal cords, different sound. He's manifested a form like the angels did in Genesis 18 that they can see as a man, but they don't recognize, neither visually nor audibly. They said to him the things concerning Jesus the Nazarene, who became a prophet, powerful in work and word before God and all the people. And how our chief priests and rulers handed him over to the sentence of death and impaled him. Verse 21, we were hoping that this man was the one destined to deliver Israel. Yes, and besides all these things, this makes the 3rd day since these things occurred. Verse 22, moreover, certain women from among us also astonished us because they had been early to the memorial tomb, but did not find his body. And they came saying that they had also seen a supernatural sight of angels who said he is alive. Verse 24, further, some of those with us went off to the memorial tomb, and they found it so, just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Verse 25, so he, this is the Jesus who's kept from their sight and they can't recognize audibly, said to them, O senseless ones and slow in heart to believe on all the things the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? Right? Glory is a spirit. Raised to life is life-giving spirit, into which state he then, according to 1 Peter, went and preached to the other spirits in prison, before on the 3rd day raising his body and doing what we're reading about right here. And commencing at Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted on things pertaining to himself in all the scriptures. Verse 28, finally they got close to the village where they were journeying, and he made it as if he was journeying on further, right? So he engaged them, he's talking to them, telling them, and they still can't tell it's his voice, right? So I clearly believe it's not only were their eyes kept from recognizing, but I believe the combination of that and the audible lack of recognition shows he's in a different body. He's in a different form, right? And they don't recognize wounds or anything like that. And then verse 29, it says, but they used pressure on him, saying, stay with us, because it is toward evening, and the day is already declined. With that he went in to stay with them. So he's been in with them quite a bit, quite a long time. And then it says, as he was reclining with them at the meal, he took the loaf, blessed it, broke it, and began to hand it to them. Okay, so now he's doing something like what he did with them on the Passover, during the Passover, and probably other times as well, like when he fed people, the way he broke the bread. But clearly here, there's something unique about the way he's breaking the bread. And so it says he broke it and handed it to them, and it says at that, right? It doesn't say the Spirit made them finally recognize him. It says at something he did, right? They were able to determine based on something he did. Now their eyes were open. They could see, oh, it's you, because you used to do that before, right? And we can hear your voice, but it doesn't sound like you. It doesn't look like you. But the way you're acting is the way you were acting before. At that, their eyes were fully open, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from them. Now, how do you disappear from being right in front of someone? You dematerialize, right? I mean, you're clearly deconstituting your body. The constituent parts that make up the physical form you've manifested are being disappeared. We don't understand exactly how that happens, like I said earlier. Just like we don't understand the way the angels could take on human form, eat with Abraham, and then go back to the spirit realm. But we know what happens. Same thing here. It literally says he disappeared from in front of them. Because he's there eating with them, breaking the bread. He's eating with them. Or we'll see, actually it's a little bit later when we get to that, where he eats in front of them. So here he's breaking the food for them. They recognize him. And then at that moment he disappears. He dematerializes. Verse 32, and they said to each other, were not our hearts burning as he was speaking to us on the road, as he was fully opening up the scriptures to us? Right? They don't say anything about, yeah, that voice sounded really familiar. It was the way, it sounded exactly like the way Jesus sounded. No. The way he talked about the scriptures. Verse 33, and in that very hour they rose and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and those with them assembled together, saying, for a fact the Lord was raised up and appeared to Simon. Now they themselves related the events on the road and how he became known to them by the breaking of the bread. Not by his appearance, not by the sound of his voice, by the breaking of the bread. Verse 36, while they were speaking of these things, he himself stood in their midst and said to them, may you have peace. So now he's appearing again. Remember earlier it said he approached and began walking with them? Because that would just make them think he's another person, right? Just some human out there on the road. So they didn't have any reason to be suspicious about him being Jesus. But then he starts talking about the scriptures. He breaks the bread a certain way. And then he disappears. Dematerializes. So whatever happened to his body there is the same thing that probably happened to his body after he ascended to the Father. They're able to get rid of it or put it away or not use it or send it back to the earth. We don't know the mechanics, as I said. We're not supposed to know. We're not supposed to know what we don't know. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. We know it happened because it happened all the way back in Genesis 18. And then it happened several times here. He appears, walks with them, approaches and walks with them, disappears. Now he's appearing, right, out of nowhere. It says, may you have peace. And it says, but because they were terrified and had become frightened, they were imagining they beheld a spirit. Right? So like either a phantom type spirit or a spirit that's possessing another human's body. And so what does he say? He says to them, why are you troubled? Why is it doubts come in your hearts? See my hands and my feet. I've had comments recently, people say, well, why did they emphasize so much the wound marks on his body? Why did he appear and point to the wound marks? Well, because they didn't believe. Both here and in John 20, chapter 20, where Thomas didn't believe, unless I see the wound marks. You want to know why he was so much pointing to the wounds in his hands and saying, see, look, it's me? Because they didn't believe. And in Thomas's case, they wouldn't believe explicitly unless, as he said, he saw those wound marks. And yet I get Trinitarians and others trying to make a big deal out of Jesus making a big deal out of his wound marks, when that's the very thing that the lack of faith in his followers called for. Because they couldn't even recognize him without those things. They didn't recognize him as he was walking along with them on the road to Emmaus. And here, they don't recognize him either, even though he appears. They get scared, think he's either a phantom or a demon-possessed person, just like spirit refers to numerous times, as I showed in my books, in Luke. And he says, no, look at my hands and my feet, right? The things you would identify with me, it's me, look. Why didn't he point to his face? Because it's not the exact same body. Just like it wasn't on the road to Emmaus. He's manifesting a body at different times for different reasons. And here he's manifesting a body with the wound marks that would show, right? Because people aren't walking around with wound marks in their hands and in their feet. But if someone appears out of nowhere in front of you, and you're already being told Jesus has been raised from the tomb, he's not there, and then he appeared to Simon. And now this being appears, and they don't know who it is, they get scared, and he says, no, look, remember those holes they made in my hands and in my feet that made you so upset? It's me. I'm back. I'm back from the dead. And he says, feel me and see. A spirit does not have flesh and bones, just as you behold I have. That's it. It shows clearly spirits do not have flesh and bones. The angels don't have them, right? They're spirits. Hebrews 1, quoting the Psalms. He makes his angels spirits, flames of fire. They don't have flesh and bones. So when they manifest as humans with flesh and bones, like we just read in Genesis 18, to the point where they can eat, you can wash their feet. They're not spirits at that point. They've taken on a real human form. Just like Jesus. But he's not just a normal human, right? Normal humans can't disappear in front of you. Normal humans can't do the things that spirits manifested as humans can do. But when they're manifested as humans, they're human. They're not spirits. They're different from like phantom, like you might see in a vision, or in an immaterial form of some kind. And they're different from spirits like demons who possess other humans. Right? The demons aren't those humans. They're possessing those humans. These spirits are human. Not like in the born sense, in the manifested sense, in the disappearing and appearing sense. Just like the angels in Genesis 18. Even to the point of eating. Look, and it says, and he said this to show them it, and as he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While they were still not believing for sheer joy and were wondering, he said to them, do you have something there to eat? And okay, so if you weren't human, why would you ask that? The angels ate with Abraham. He made them round cakes, gave them milk, honey, and a good young bull. Okay, so when they take on a human form, and it's not like an immaterialized spirit, a phantom, the way demons sometimes do, the way the witch of Endor conjured up Samuel So they're able to actually become fully human and even eat, both in Genesis 18 and right here, with wounds in his feet. So this is where Trinitarians and others, they just can't comprehend what they're reading, right? It's right in front of them. It doesn't require any special degree. It doesn't require any special knowledge of Hebrew or Greek. It just requires that you believe. And they don't believe. They don't believe the Jesus of the Bible, as I often tell you guys. That's why they argue with you all the time. They're arguing for another Jesus after the Bible. And so they just reject all this stuff. And they ask dumb questions like, well, what happened to his body? Have you ever read Genesis 18? What happened to the angels' bodies? Right? They manifested with Abraham. He washed their feet. He ate with them. Did they just stay human? No. Spirits do not have flesh and bones. So you'd have to argue they never became spirits again. And yet we know that's what they did because they're angels. Same with Jesus. He was raised a life-giving spirit. He manifested a human body, became human again so his disciples could see it was really him. Right? Because like with Paul, right? You notice after Jesus ascended to the Father, he didn't appear in a human body anymore. When he appeared to Paul in the book of Acts, according to the account in the book of Acts, it's brilliant, bright light, right, from the heavens. So Paul wasn't asking for the kind of wound, because Paul didn't see him put to death. They did. They knew exactly where he was wounded, how he was killed. So the kind of proof they were requesting fit their experience. With Paul, he didn't have that experience. He didn't know Jesus like that. And he already knew that the other Christians believed he had been raised up and had gone through these experiences. At least at some of them probably were told him before he converted. So his conversion being one from the heavens without having to have this kind of physical manifestation makes perfect sense. Right? And would be even more powerful from the heavenly realm. But it wouldn't, unless all this other stuff was happening, have made sense to Paul. Right? Who was Jesus? Right? He already knew who Jesus was because of the experiences of these people. And the experiences of these people fit more with them requiring him to provide human manifestation of who he was. Because even when he did that, right, it's hard for them to believe this is happening. That they're not being tricked by an evil spirit or somehow. So he's giving them the proof necessary that they would recognize because they were there when he was put to death. And then it says, and they handed him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it before their eyes. Can a spirit do that? No, because you need flesh and bones, right? To, take a piece of fish into your mouth, chew it. You need flesh for that, right? You need your tongue. You need all your cheek muscles and everything. Your jaw muscles. You need bone, right? You need the jawbone. You need the whole process of the swallowing that relates to the neck muscles, the neck bones, the digestive tract, right? He's actually eating a piece of fish, just like the angels ate milk, honey, round cakes, and bull. They're fully human. They're not spirits. And when they are spirits, when he's raised a life-giving spirit, like 1 Corinthians 15:45 says, like word for word, right? Our beliefs are what? Word for word. We don't have to add to it. We don't have to deny it. Then we know he was raised in a form, a spiritual body that's contrasted with the physical body in that very context. We know he doesn't have flesh and bone. He says so right here. A spirit does not have those. But when we spirits manifest as humans, of course we have those. How do you think I'm going to show you the evidence of when I was killed? Yeah, you don't recognize me. You don't recognize my voice because I'm manifesting a human form for you. It's fully human. Give me that fish right there. I'm going to eat it. We get to experience those things. We're spirits who can take on human form and enjoy the fruits of the earth if we want to. Genesis 18, Luke 24. But when we're spirits, we don't have flesh and bone. He says so right there. They just twist the account around and try to make it seem like when he's actually a man, that him having flesh and bone as a man, when he's manifested as a man, means that when he's a spirit, he doesn't have those. That's how ridiculous they are. They've totally collapsed over the plain reading of these texts. It's their tradition which does it. I get questions often like, why don't people see all this stuff, right? And it's not that we're so insightful. We just don't have traditions that are blinding us. Just like the scribes and Pharisees of Jesus' day, right? They had Messiah right in front of them. Their traditions are so powerful, it blinds them to the law of Moses and to the law of the Christ. Same thing today. So, when it comes to spirits, right, let's go to Daniel real quickly. We've read this before many times to show how spirits are described. This is not flesh and bone, right? Daniel chapter 10, verses 5 and 6. I also proceeded to raise my eyes and see, and there was a certain man clothed in linen, right? A man just like, in a sense, like the angels of Genesis 18, although this one is not in a fully human form. This one is kind of like a man. It doesn't say like a man here, but look at what it describes him as. His hips girded with the gold of Uphaz. His body was like chrysolite. His face like the appearance of lightning. That's not flesh, okay? His eyes are like fiery torches. His arms and the place of his feet are like the side of burnished copper. And the sound of his words was like the sound of a crowd. Right? If your face looks like lightning, your appearance, your face, and your eyes are fiery torches, you're not human. Your flesh would be melting off your body. That's why it says his feet, his arms and his feet were like burnished copper. That's almost exactly how. The only difference really being that here it describes his face as the appearance of lightning. His eyes are fiery torches, but his appearance is described as lightning here. Look at Revelation 1, 13 through 16. This is how the resurrected Jesus is described. Not as a human, not in the form of Luke 24, but in heaven like this. It says, I turned to see the voice speaking with me. In the midst of the lampstand, someone like a son of man, clothed with a garment, reached down to his feet, and girded at the breast with a golden girdle, just like we read in Daniel. Right, and here again, here it does use like a son of man. And we know it's like a man there because a man doesn't have appearance like lightning, but it's in the form of a man, right? There's certain things about the figure in Daniel 10, 5, and 6 that are like a man. And then there are other things that show it's clearly not a man. It's an angel, as the account goes on to describe. Clothed with a garment, reached down to his feet, girded at the breast with a golden girdle. Moreover, his head and his hair were white as wool, as snow. His eyes a fiery flame, just like in Daniel. Eyes fiery torches. And his feet were like fine copper when glowing in a furnace, exactly like in Daniel. And his voice was as the sound of many waters, just like in Daniel. Voices of a great crowd, voices of many waters. Feet and arms like copper. Feet were like copper, glowing in a furnace. Eyes of fire. And it says in verse 16, and he had in his right hand 7 stars, out of his mouth a sharp, long, two-edged sword protruding, and his countenance was as the sun when it shines in its power. Right? Remember back in Daniel, it said the countenance of that angelic being, that spirit being, was as lightning. That's really the only difference here. That and I guess the two-edged sharp sword, which I think could be a forked tongue, kind of like a serpentine type tongue, right? It's possible in any sense. It's like a sword, right? Because I think these beings have this association, like the seraphs, right? Fiery, flying serpents. Satan, right? He appears as a serpent. Either way, you can see here he's clearly not described the way he's described in Luke, right? And it's like, I've done several videos on this, clipped them recently. So I can't, Trinitarians and others, they just don't accept the Jesus of the Bible, right? And then in the case of Trinitarians, they need this God-man so they can attribute all the things that Jesus says, like in Revelation 3, where he refers to as God constantly, or in Revelation 1:1, where he receives a divine revelation, right? A disclosure of information. Why? So he doesn't know that. Why would he have to be given a divine revelation if he already knows everything? If he's omniscient, co-equal with the Father? He wouldn't. But he is. So they say, well, that's the man part of him, right? They split him up into two people, even though they say he's just one person. They give him two natures, one that knows all things, one that doesn't know all things. So guess what? That's two centers of consciousness. You can't know and not know all things at the same time. It's a contradiction. Trinitarians are blind. They've embraced false doctrine at the expense of these texts and at the expense of their own mind. They throw logic and reason out the window, and they don't even harmonize it with what the texts say that Jesus did or did not know. So, I hope that helps you. I hope that helps you when it comes to the question, what happened to Jesus' body? Because I believe the same thing happened to Jesus' body after he was raised life-giving spirit. Spirit doesn't have flesh and bone, but he took on those to show himself to his disciples, to prove he was resurrected in a way that didn't allow them to recognize him because he was in a different body with a different voice, but could manifest the wound marks of his choice and become fully human, even to the point of eating with them, just like the angels did with Abraham. Remember those two accounts. They will help you explain that in a way that should show the Trinitarians or others they don't know what they're talking about. And they're trying to get us to explain something that we don't have to talk about, but that we can show by parallel with how the angels in the Old Testament took on fully human forms, the same way Jesus took on a fully human form, was able to then leave his fully human form and become like this. Not human. Just like when, after appearing to Paul, he was light. Paul then says what? In Galatians 1. He was appointed neither from men nor through a man, but through Jesus Christ. Right? Because he wasn't appointed when Jesus was fully human after appearing to his disciples. He was appointed by Jesus after Jesus was raised to the right hand of the Father and was like we just saw described by John in Revelation 1. And so Paul goes on to say in verses 11 and 12, the good news which was declared to me is not something human. Neither did I receive it from man. Nor was I taught it except through revelation by Jesus. If Jesus is a man, then he did receive it from a man, but he's not a man other than in the historical sense in which Paul refers to in 1 Timothy 2:5, who gave his life as a man. Right? Remember these texts. We believe the texts. They believe what's next. And that's why we have problems with a lot of people. But I would encourage you to try to avoid discussions with people after you point all this stuff out, right? Show up, make a defense. But don't waste your time too much with these people. You're likely not going to change them. They already know these texts. They just don't believe them. And they're going to try to get you not to believe them and depress you when you could be out teaching them to people who actually are probably ready to believe them. If you just get to them in time and you teach them the right way and you teach them the truth. And you let them know other people think these things because they're blind. They believe these traditions that are not the truth. And they believed them for thousands of years in ways that they're just very hard to give up, just like the Jews. Just like the scribes and Pharisees of Jesus' day. And it was hard for them to give them up, and he was right in front of them. So don't discount the power of tradition. It blinds people to their mission of teaching these texts right. All right, let's talk about the wages of sin. First, though, I think we have a visitor. I think someone's been listening to our discussion. Who could it be? Let's find out. First, let me... You ready? Dada. You see Dada? Dada's been listening to us. Hello, Dada. He's a good boy. You were probably wondering, why I had the, if you saw the blanket, maybe you didn't, oh, there it is. I left that on there because Dada likes to have like enclosed areas. He likes to have like areas he can climb into that are blocked off from the rest of the room, or in a little bit of darkness, so he can get a little rest during the day. But I suspected he was there. I could just sense that someone was listening. Good boy, Dada. All right, so let's talk about the wages of sin and the resurrection. All right, so I've seen videos by certain people who don't believe the Bible. And they criticize the Bible by saying, well, if the wages sin pays is death, then why are people resurrected and then judged according to their deeds? Right? The death paid them. It's over. But they don't understand. Now, Dennis, does anybody know what Dennis is doing? Because Dennis is acting like the show hasn't started. Hey, Dennis, I don't know if you can hear or what might be going on, but I've been going for over an hour. So I don't know if maybe your feed just isn't working. But I've been here the whole time. So I don't know if maybe some of you haven't been seeing me. It should be there after the show's done. I don't know what happened. There is a notice on. I can see in my stream key something from YouTube not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. I've seen that before. It doesn't tend to affect the quality after the fact, and I'm recording it. So if a large part of this is somehow not there when I'm done, I'll just upload it. Okay. So back to the wages sin pays is death and how that relates to the resurrection. Let's go to Daniel again. Let's start in Daniel. And just to show the consistency of the Bible all the way through. Right? And we know that people even before Daniel, like Abraham, had hope of a city, right? Of a place with real foundations in the future after they were dead. So that would suggest they believed in another life that would come. We know that David spoke of his soul not being left in Sheol. That was also messianic, but that he spoke from himself as well. Not entirely, because there are parts that are clearly not applicable to him. But, at least not yet, right? He'll eventually be raised out of Sheol. Not yet. And then other parts about different aspects of that psalm that we talked about in that video I did in the C.W. Jatak series on pre-Christian evidence, Jesus is the biblical Messiah. But that there's elements of a belief in a future resurrection, even before the text in Daniel that we're going to read. So let's take a look. Let me bring you guys back up. Daniel chapter 12. Let's just take a look. Let's read verses 1 through 3, and then we'll read 8 through 13, just the parts that deal with the resurrection. So it says, and during that time, Michael will stand up, the great prince who is standing in behalf of the sons of your people. And there will certainly occur a time of distress such as has not been made to occur since there came to be a nation until that time. And during that time, your people will escape, everyone who is found written down in the book. And there will be many of those asleep in the ground of dust who will wake up, these to an indefinitely lasting life, and those to reproaches, to indefinitely lasting abhorrence. So, it says people will be asleep in the ground and wake up. And it says some of them will wake up to indefinitely lasting life, and some to indefinitely lasting abhorrence. And then it says, and the ones having insight will shine like the brightness of the expanse, and those who are bringing the many to righteousness like the stars to time indefinite, even forever. And then let's go to verse 8. Now as for me, I heard, but I could not understand, so that I said, O my Lord, what will be the final part of these things? He went on to say, Go, Daniel, because the words are made secret and sealed up until the time of the end. Many will cleanse themselves and whiten themselves and will be refined, and the wicked ones will certainly act wickedly, and no wicked ones at all will understand. The ones having insight will understand. And from that time, from the time that the constant feature has been removed, and there's been a placing of the disgusting thing that is causing desolation, there will be 1,290 days. I'll do a separate show on this, by the way, so I'm not going to get off on it right now. Happy is the one who is keeping an expectation, who arrives at the 1,335 days. And as for yourself, go toward the end, and you will rest, right? Like these up here are resting. Right here, being asleep in the ground of dust, who will wake up, and says, go toward the end, talking to Daniel, you will rest, but you will stand up for your lot, right? For what is assigned to you at the end of the days. So we get a couple interesting things here, do we not? That there would be people who would be found written down in the book, and there'd be many asleep in the ground who would wake up, some to good life, some to bad, everything bad, right? Definitely lasting abhorrence, that's pretty bad. Whatever it is, right? Even if that's just separation from God in the sense that you don't get to enjoy everlasting life. Either way, we'll get to it more in a moment, but it says in the NWT, indefinitely lasting abhorrence. And then it says Daniel would go toward the end, would rest, but then stand up for his lot at the end of the days. Now let's go to John chapter 5. This is a text that, like when I started the show, we often combine with 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17 to show Jesus is the archangel. He's an archangel, and probably the archangel Michael. The one we were just reading about in relation to Daniel in the end times. But he's definitely an archangel. He has the voice of the archangel, which in 1 Thessalonians 4 is raising the dead with the trumpet. Then in 1 Corinthians 15 raises the dead. And then it says in John chapter 5, we'll read verse 28. This is Jesus talking. He says, do not marvel at this, because the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs will hear his voice. In verse 29, and come out those who did good things to a resurrection of life, those who practice vile things to a resurrection of judgment. Just like we read in Daniel chapter 12. Right? Just like it. There'd be those asleep in the ground of dust who would wake up to indefinitely lasting life or indefinitely lasting abhorrence. Here, a resurrection of life, resurrection of judgment. Now let's go to Acts 24. Acts 24:15. And here Paul says, I have hope towards God, which hope these men also entertain, that there's going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Isn't that what we just read in both Daniel 12 and John chapter 5? It's the same thing. Now, some people that I've heard on videos that are really just not capable of comprehending the Bible refer to this and say, well, why would Paul say he has hope toward God after being appeared to by Jesus? Wouldn't he know that? Wouldn't this be like automatic? No, it wouldn't be automatic. You know what would be automatic? What he actually experienced. That Jesus was alive. That Jesus actually appointed him as an apostle, as we saw in Galatians. But a resurrection would not be automatic just because you were spoken to by a spirit. Because you haven't seen the resurrection. You have seen the Spirit. That's a difference. We have faith that Jesus exists. If you've seen him, like Paul did, faith is different from hope. Faith is based on absolute evidence of things you cannot see. He couldn't see him in the heavens, but he knew he was speaking to him, and he had this bright light that he accepted as Jesus and had faith in him. He has not yet seen the resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. Right? Even if he and other early Christians would raise people from the dead, that's not what he's talking about. There is going to be. So hope is very similar to faith, as I showed in my video on faith. And how it's always based on good reasons. It's never just this blind, well, I hope it happens. Now, even hope, right? Hope is based on something you believe for a reason. It's just different from faith because faith has better, more manifest reasons. And it's the same with this, right? That he would have faith in Jesus because he actually appeared to him, but he would have hope in the resurrection because of his faith in Jesus, and because the resurrection is not something he's seen happen yet. But he has hope that it will because of his faith in Jesus. I can't believe how ridiculous some people get when they try to criticize the Bible. It's just like Daniel said. They don't understand. They're just wicked people that are trying to criticize things because they don't believe them. And instead of living their life and trying to do good for people in whatever way they think is best, they take the time to totally show they don't know what they're talking about by misreading these texts, by not understanding hope, by not understanding faith, and by not understanding the resurrection. All right, we'll get to the chat in just a moment. But let's finish this topic here so you guys can understand how to explain that when we die, if the wages sin pays are death, how is it that this resurrection of the righteous and unrighteous can happen and people be judged according to the things they've done, like we read in John 5, right? Let's go back to it real quickly, because Paul doesn't specify it here, but he speaks of the righteous and the unrighteous coming back to life, right? But in John 5:28 or 29, right, he talks about those who did good things and those who practiced vile things. Okay, so if when you die, your sins, right, the things you're doing, the vile things, well, maybe not the vile things, but the mistakes, the sins, sometimes vile, you're put to death and you pay for those sins in your life by that death. So how are you judged in the resurrection? By the things you did while you were alive. You see what I'm asking? You see the question that some people put to us? It's really not very good if you think it out, but it can be a little tricky if you don't explain it just right. So that's what we need to answer, right? How are we judged after the resurrection by what we did when we were alive if we paid the price for our sins by death? Well, let's go to that text right now and just show that that's the case first. Romans chapter 6. Right, so right in verse 7 he says, he who has died has been acquitted from his sin. So how is it that according to Jesus in John 5:28, you can be judged according to the things you did if you're acquitted from what you did by your death? Your sin. Your sin is what leads to your death, and you're acquitted from it when you die. So why are you judged for it in the resurrection after you die? And look at also at verse 23, the text I've been alluding to. The wages sin pays is death, but the gift God gives is everlasting life by Jesus Christ our Lord. Right, so the wages, the sin, the things you do while you're alive that are bad, right, that are sinful, that we have to pay for that with our life. So why are we judged for it in the resurrection? The things we did while we were alive, if we pay for it when we die. The answer is tied into this second part. The gift God gives. Right? So every single person who's been alive except Jesus has sinned and therefore has died. Right? People who do primarily, other than their sinful stuff. Think of Joseph. Right? Joseph, Jacob's son, who was appointed as governor of Egypt. Well, before that, right, he had to do what? He had to resist Potiphar's wife, or he did. Potiphar's wife made advances on him, wanted to have relations with him and commit adultery with him because she was married to Potiphar. And Joseph did what? He resisted. He's a sinful person, right? He's got an inherent desire to sin at times, but he did not do it with Potiphar's wife. He was able to resist sin there. Because even though he's a sinner, he doesn't go through life desiring to sin. It just happens at times. Like with David. David was a man after Jehovah's own heart, right? But he sent a man to die so that he could be with Bathsheba. But that wasn't his whole life wasn't defined by that. It was a big one. It was bad. But he didn't he didn't go doing it like Cain, right? So as far as what we know from Cain, Cain had an opportunity to resist sin. Jehovah said to him, he went to him right at the point where Cain was so upset, so jealous of Abel, he wanted to kill him. And Jehovah went to him and says, wait a minute, you can resist this. Sin is waiting for you. And if you're not careful, it's going to consume you. And then Jehovah backed away, let him decide. And he decided, even after being warned and after having time to think about this, to kill his brother. And then as far as we know, that pretty much was the type of person Cain was throughout his life. So there's a difference between people like Joseph and David and Cain. We're all sinners. Even Joseph was a sinner. He just showed by example in that instance, right, what David could have done as well. But then David probably did things that Joseph didn't do in ways that also showed that overall he was a man after God's own heart. Not Cain. So there's a difference between the kinds of sins that are inherent to us through our being children of Adam and Eve, and then the situations where we're able to show faith that we know, either through the law of our heart or through the faith we have in God's law or in Jesus at whatever time we are, right, under the law or post-law. But even apart from the law or apart from Jesus, Paul says there are people that don't know those things and they are a law to themselves. So people can show who they are at different times in spite of failing at other times. It's that kind of activity that will determine whether we have faith through the law or through the Christ or through the law of our heart, that God rewards with the gift of life, right? We don't earn it. There's no amount of works. It says right here, the gift God gives. Why does he give that gift to anyone? Why did, like we read in Daniel 12 and in John 5 and in Acts 24, why is there a separation between the good and bad people, or righteous and unrighteous? Right? Jesus said so. The ones who practice good things and the ones who practice vile things. Neither one of those, well, in the case of good things, right, they don't earn us life, but they show we had faith enough to resist sin at times in this life that God rewards. The people that just surrender to sin, like Cain, they just give in, they're not going to be rewarded with life. We're all going to pay the price for any sins we commit with death. But only those who practiced good things, who showed faith in the law or in the Christ or through the law of our heart, or the conscience that God gave every human being to be able to tell what's right and wrong, to know good and bad. The very thing we inherited from Adam and Eve, right? The ones that try to do what's good even though we're sinners demonstrate the faith that God rewards with life. But we're still going to pay for the sins we commit with death. The people that give in to sin, again like Cain, and who don't show faith, they're going to pay for their sins with death either way too. But they're not going to be given life in the resurrection. They're going to be judged, and as we're going to see next, thrown into the lake of fire, which means the second death. Before we go to that, Romans 8:8 states, so those who are in harmony with the flesh cannot please God, right? So this would be like Cain and others at times that not just like David in a situation, but that intentionally throughout their life continued to be in harmony with the flesh. But we are in harmony not with the flesh, but with the Spirit. And even those who had faith like Abraham in the future of God's promises, or others who are apart from the law, or who are apart from God's promises, or even apart from the Christ, but have a law of themselves in their heart, if they listen to it, God will judge them acceptable for life. They don't earn it. We don't earn it. He gives it to us. This is what throws all the once saved, always saved people off. They start hearing, well, the faith that's shown by our works is going to be the basis for our acceptance. That's what Jesus said. John 5:28. We just read it. Those who practice good things, life. Those who practice vile things, judgment. Right? See, they just don't believe the Bible. They don't believe the Jesus of the Bible. We do. And it doesn't have anything to do with earning anything. It's just we can show our faith by what we do. Just like James talks about explicitly. They're blind. They can't put it together, everybody. And it's just like Daniel 12 said. It's not our fault. We have to keep going. We have to try to do the best we can to show God we have faith. That we'll pay for our sins with our life, just like all the Christians did, right? Paul, Peter, John, they all died. They paid for their sins with their life. But they had life in the Christ because they were showing faith in the Son of God. All right, let's go now to Revelation 20, and then we'll wrap this up and get to the chat. Bankhead, I was wondering where you've been. Good to see you. Okay, Revelation 20. All right, let's just read a good little section here, okay? Because I think this will be helpful. And we're going to wrap up this whole question of, well, how can we pay for our sins? The wages of sin is death, at death, and then we're resurrected and judged according to the things we did in life. I just explained it. If you missed, you joined us late, take a listen, because I made it very clear with biblical examples exactly how that is the case. How even though we all sin, so we all die and we pay the price for our sins, some of us, like Joseph, show faith in doing what is right. Even if we make big sins in our life, like David, he was still a man after God's own heart. Unlike Cain, who chose to kill his brother and allowed that condition to set in, he practiced vile things. At least it seems that way, right? We don't really know, ultimately. We have to let Jehovah decide through the Christ if they ever changed their heart and stopped practicing vile things and started practicing what's right. They don't earn life, but they show faith that God rewards with life. Revelation 20. So you are judged according to what you did. Everyone dies and pays the price for any sins, but there's a certain pattern of choice and desire in life that we either follow or don't to show we have faith in the law of our heart, law of Moses, the promises of God, or the Christ that God rewards with life, or that we don't, and we just do whatever we want at anyone's expense, no matter what the cost, and those are not given life. Everybody pays for the sins we commit in life with death. Some are rewarded by trying to do what's right, and in fact at times doing what's right, like Joseph did, with life in the resurrection. Those who don't even try or who give in to sin and who practice vile things throughout their life are judged in the resurrection. Revelation chapter 20. Let's read verses 1 through 21:8. But you need to hear this. This is so important to tie all this together. Excuse me. And then we'll take a look at the chat. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven with the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he seized the dragon, the original serpent, who is devil and Satan, and he bound him for 1,000 years. And he hurled him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him, that he might not mislead the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After these things he must be let loose for a little while. And I saw thrones, and those who sat down on them, and the power of judging was given them. Yes, I saw the souls of those executed with the axe for the witness they bore to Jesus and for speaking about God. Those who had worshipped neither the wild beast nor its image, and who had not received the mark upon their forehead or upon their hand. They came to life and ruled as kings with the Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. The first resurrection is right here. Just like in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. So all those asleep in the ground who died in union with Christ are resurrected to rule with him on his Father's throne. The nations who are approved, right, the sheep on Christ's right hand when he comes in Matthew 25, they inherit the kingdom prepared for the founding, from the founding of the earth, founding of the world. and are the great crowd that wash their robes and make them white in the blood of the Lamb, over whom these ones rule. The nations. The nations are gathered before his throne, and he separates them according to how they treated the Christians. And then look, it says, happy and holy is anyone having a part in the first resurrection. Over these the second death has no authority. But they will be priests of God and of the Christ, and will rule as kings with him for 1,000 years. Now, as soon as the 1,000 years have ended, Satan will be let out of his prison. Look what he does. He goes out to mislead those nations. This is the great crowd, right? The great crowd from all nations. The nations that are gathered before his throne in Matthew 25. They come in to the new earth, go through the great tribulation, over whom the Christians with the Christ are ruling on his Father's throne. Revelation 2 and 3. And as we just read in chapter 20, verse 4. So Satan, now after the 1,000 years, it doesn't say he goes out to mislead the resurrected ones, right? No. It says he goes out to mislead the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of these is as the sand of the sea. And it says they advanced over the breadth of the earth and encircled the camp of the holy ones in the beloved city. But fire came down out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil who was misleading them was hurled into the lake of fire and sulfur, where both the wild beast and the false prophet already were, and they were tormented day and night forever and ever. Right? And this could be, of course, in the sense that, in which case, if Satan is a spirit, and he's already fire, right, and he's in this fiery lake, he's just in eternal separation as a fiery spirit, totally unable to do anything. We don't know what the purpose of this lake of fire is. I'd hate to be in it, though, right, and just never being able to escape it. Anyway, again, this gets into the metaphysical explanations of things that we don't fully understand. But moving past that for now, look at what it says next. I saw a great white throne and the one seated on it. Before him the earth and the heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and scrolls were opened. But another scroll was opened. It is the scroll of life. Remember, back in Daniel, what it said, right? It was specific in talking about this book. During that time, your people will escape everyone who is found down written in the book. And that Daniel would stand up for his lot at the end of the days. So, this is talking about after the 1,000 years, right? Because the resurrection doesn't happen until the end of the 1,000 years. We read it. We read it right here. It doesn't happen at the start of the 1,000 years or even during the 1,000 years. It happens at the end. The rest of the dead, everybody but these people who are described in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 as being in union with Christ, who are caught away to be with the Christ, to rule with the Christ on his Father's throne over the nations that treated his brothers right, Matthew 25, Revelation 7, the rest of the dead do not come to life until the 1,000 years are ended. And that's exactly what we see happen, right? It says, now as soon as the 1,000 years have ended, Satan is let loose. He goes to the nations in the four corners of the earth. These are the nations that come through the great tribulation, the Matthew 25 sheep that treated Christ's brothers right without realizing who they were. And so they are shepherded and guided to fountains of waters of life. They're broken to pieces the way a potter breaks clay vessels to pieces. Revelation 2 and 3, we've read it many times. And they're healed by the leaves of the trees. But, at this point, they still haven't been fully tested by the devil who has not been let loose. Now he's let loose. He goes to mislead those nations. Many follow him. They advance with the devil over the earth, and they threaten the holy city. They're totally destroyed. 1,000 years are over. Satan's totally destroyed. All those who are with him totally destroyed. Now we get The rest of the dead. These right here, this happens right here. I saw a great white throne, one seated upon it. We read that. I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne. Scrolls were opened. We read that. Daniel, you'll stand up for your lot at the end of the days. Everyone will escape. Everyone written down in the book. Another scroll was opened, the scroll of life. The dead were judged out of those things written in the scrolls according to their deeds. What did Jesus say in John chapter 5, verse 28? Verse 29, and come out those who did good things to a resurrection of life, those who practiced vile things to a resurrection of judgment. Deeds. Did good things. Practiced vile things. Those are deeds. Back to the second resurrection. After the end of the 1,000 years. See, they were judged individually. They were judged out of those things written in the scrolls according to their deeds, right? So they've already died. They paid for their sins. The wages sin pays is death. They've been acquitted from their sins. Now they're being resurrected to determine if they showed faith by following the law of their heart, the law of Moses, the promises of God, in the case of like with Abraham, or the Christ, to receive everlasting life. Or if they practiced vile things, showed no faith in any of those things I just mentioned, and so were deserving of death or everlasting abhorrence, however it's to be understood at this point. That's the judgment that's happening. So everyone is acquitted from their sins at death. We're then just judged in the resurrection as to whether we're worthy of life. It doesn't mean worthy in the sense of earning it. Like, oh God, now you owe it to me. You know what? I was a sinful person, but I really tried hard and I did some good things a lot of the time. Now you owe me life. No, it doesn't work that way. He'll give you life because of those things, because they show you had faith even though you were a sinful person. You're not owed it. He's going to give it to you as a gift. We read that in Romans 6:23. But it is the basis for whether he chooses to give you that gift. It says right here, they're judged out of those things written in the scrolls according to their deeds. This isn't me. The Trinitarians and others who just reject the Bible don't understand how deeds or works factor into all this, because they show whether you had faith. Just like the person who was executed with Jesus, right? He finally, at the very end, showed faith. He spoke and showed he believed in Jesus. Will you remember me when you get into your kingdom? Okay, that's it. That's all you have to do. He's paying the price for his sins right there, right? But and he does. He's executed there with Jesus. And then when he's brought back to life in this judgment, the rest of the dead, they're going to look at that faith, unless he's one of those who died in union with Christ, right? I don't know that. But I'm using him as an example, right? Because he showed the faith at the end that God rewards with life. Whereas the other one, right? The other one who died next to Jesus did not do that, did he? The one who showed faith told that one to shut up because he was mocking Jesus. Right? If you're the Christ, free yourself and us. He didn't have faith. He's going to pay for his sins with that execution. Then probably, right? I don't know ultimately. I'm using it as an example. Be resurrected. And if he didn't show the faith that was necessary, he's going to be judged unworthy for life. He didn't show faith, even though a sinner. So God's not going to reward him. He didn't believe in his son right there, dying with him. Let's read the rest of the account. And death and Hades were hurled into the lake of fire. This means the second death. This is why I say, it's not clear exactly how this all works metaphysically. But either way, right, even if it is real fire in the sense in which fire may exist in heaven, like the angels makes his angels spirits, flames of fire, there can be a number of ways to understand the torment, even with Satan still living in that lake of fire is just fire and being tormented because he can never escape it. And he's just constantly going to be there as this fiery place, part of it, right, existentially. Again, beyond what we can really fully comprehend and explain. but based on what we are told. Verse 15, furthermore, whoever was not found written in the book of life was hurled into the lake of fire. Just like Daniel 12 said, everyone who will escape those found written down in the book. And just like it says right here, according to their deeds, judged out of those things written in the scrolls. The scrolls containing their deeds determine whether or not you're in the book of life. And so those people are resurrected who paid with their life for the sins they committed. Everyone's resurrected before the great white throne. Everyone who died and wasn't part of the first resurrection are now brought to life and judged out of the things that define whether they had faith in their life. And then either given life, everlasting, or destroyed, second death. And then after it says that everyone was judged, right? Everyone's resurrected. First resurrections happen. Satan has misled the nations who kept living into the new earth, the great tribulation. They've been destroyed, the ones who followed him. Now everyone is brought to life, judged out of the things they did in their life, and either given everlasting life or second death. Right after that, I saw a new heavens and a new earth. Former heavens and the former earth had passed away, and the sea is no more. I saw also the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. With that I heard a loud voice from the throne say, look, the tent of God is with mankind, and he will reside with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He'll wipe out every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Neither will mourning nor outcry nor pain be any more. The former things have passed away. This is the full realization of the new heavens and the new earth. Right after the great tribulation and the nations are destroyed and Satan's put in prison, there is a new heavens and a new earth, but they're not in the full final condition that they are right here, because Satan's let loose again and they're destroyed. Death is still in existence because the great white throne judgment hasn't occurred and the devil has not been destroyed yet. But now we're past all that. Death is gone completely. So we're in the full realization of that new heavens and new earth. And then it says the one seated on the throne says, look, I'm making all things new. Also he says, write, because these words are faithful and true. And he said to me, they have come to pass. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To anyone thirsting I will give from the fountain of water of life free. Anyone conquering these things, I shall be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowards and those without faith, like I've been explaining this whole time in relation to the works or deeds of people, from Daniel to John 5 to Acts 24 to Romans 6, Romans 8, and Revelation 20 and 21, as for the cowards, as for those without faith, like Cain, or like the other person who was executed besides Jesus who didn't show faith, those who are disgusting in their filth and murderers, those who practice vile things, John 5:28 and 29, murderers and fornicators, and those practicing spiritism, idolaters, and all the liars, all those teaching false doctrine and lies about the Son of God and his God, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur. This means, or this is, the second death. Right? Because the first death is the death where you pay for your sins during your life, right? Then you're resurrected. You're judged out of the things found written down in the scrolls to determine if you had faith. And if you did have faith, even though you were a sinner, God gifts you with life. If you didn't show faith in the sense in which God approves as having faith, either in the promises of God, in the law of God, in the Christ of God, or the law of your heart, and you practice vile things, then you get another death. You get killed again. So everyone is brought to life and judged, either as worthy of staying alive forever or as being put to death forever. The second death. So I hope that explains that subject for you all. I just wanted to go over it because I saw some terrible, horrible videos that just are terribly disgusting and lame in how they go about trying to figure out the Bible, and they don't even believe it. And they mislead people with their lack of faith, lack of understanding, just like we read in Daniel. So I wanted to go through these things so that you are prepared and capable of dealing with these issues that I believe are actually quite simple. We just need to break them down sometimes, because we get people who run around, and instead of trying to figure them out and trying to make them simple, they make them all complicated. Just like we saw earlier with the whole body of Jesus thing, right? They can't figure these things out, even though they have examples right in front of them in other contexts. So let's take a look let's check on Dada. Let's see how he's doing. Dada. Can everybody see Dada? He's a good boy. Hello, Dada. Oh, our little visitor. Let's see how everyone's doing in the chat. Accurate for life. Question: do you think Christianity will change 20 years from now? Yes and no. We'll probably still have false teachers and liars. People that put their traditions above the Word of God, just like they always have, just like they did before Christians came into existence in the Jewish times. People who prefer the glory of humans rather than the glory of God. But the Christian witnesses of Job arrived, right? We now have, I tell you, I think about it often. I think about how happy I am that we have this opportunity to teach people in a way that is so simple. One God the Father, the Son of God sent from heaven, the Messiah. Pre-Christian evidence all over the place in texts that were written before he came into this place. The world that was made through him. John 1:10, excuse me. And the golden rule, right? Treat others the way you want to be treated. People get to choose what to do. We don't judge them. Right? It doesn't mean we have to approve everything people do. Let them choose. Let people choose. And then let the one who knows how to judge take care of things. If you don't want to associate with someone because you don't like the choices they make, fine. Stop judging them and go live your own life, right? Doesn't mean you have to shun them in every single aspect of what you do or may do with them. But you don't have to get close with every single person either. So if some people choose to celebrate certain days or do certain things that you don't do, then don't associate with them during those times and on those days. But they get to choose. Right? Trinitarians and others, and a lot of these false liars, or not false liars, but false teachers and liars, they're out here running around, right? They come to my channel, they come to you probably, and all they want to do is judge you. Oh, you shouldn't believe that. Oh, you're wrong about that. They don't have any spiritual life. They're done. Right? They've essentially given up on Christianity. Because if they were practicing Christianity, they'd be out promoting belief in the biblical Christ and in the biblical God and treating each other the way they want to be treated, not judging everybody. Right? Some people you can openly expose and show, right, they're liars. I've done it myself. I had to. Because they're liars. But then I let them go, right? And I don't go seeking them out and bothering them and condemning them and telling them how terrible they are and what false teachers. I do it, I address it when it comes up, and I move on, right? I'm moving way on. I'm past all that now. Unless it comes back again in a way I have to deal with for some reason. Our goal is not to go running around trying to expose everybody. I have faith that people can tell who's lying and who's not if they just take the time to listen to the evidence, to find out on their own, to trust in God to show them the way, the truth, and the life. A lot of these people in these different false religious groups, they don't have that kind of confidence in anybody. They don't even have it in themselves. That's why they have to spend all their time in apologetics, right? Because they're so burdened and bothered by other people not believing exactly the way they do, even if some of the things they don't believe in are not true. They don't have any confidence or faith. So they think they have to run around and argue with everybody. Well, what does Paul say in Philippians? Do all things apart from argument. You're not supposed to be running around arguing with everybody all the time. But that seems like that's all some people do. That's their whole ministry, right? Without arguing and debate, they wouldn't even be believers, probably. Being a Christian is really about praising God, right? Attributing to God the reason why things exist, giving him credit, believing in the Christ, right? Recognizing that he actually exists, that he came to this earth, he did the things that are written down before he came to this earth, and that were described by those who lived with him after he left this earth, so that we can have confidence that God actually did tell the truth back in Adam and Eve's case with regard to the seed that would restore all things by crushing the serpent, like we just read in Revelation 20 and 21. And then restoring all things, right? Making all things new, a new heavens and a new earth, where after all these things have been concluded, we can then, in the fullest sense possible, with no death, no pain, no suffering, exist in the image of God and praise him by the things that he allows us to do. And we can do that now by treating others the way we want to be treated. That's really where you're going to experience Christianity. That by helping the poor, right? Not by blowing a trumpet and letting everyone know, hey, I'm helping the poor. Just do it. Just help someone without anyone else knowing, right? Like the Good Samaritan, right? You don't have to announce it to anybody. Just do it. Your Father who looks on in secret sees what's going on. Right? He knows what's going on in your mind too, just like with Sarah, right? When she didn't believe that she would have a child. He's aware. His Spirit is in us. So he's always present with us and can know whatever's going on in us. We don't need other people to know what we're doing. Just do it. And then you'll have a great reward in the heavens. Just like Jesus says. That's really where we're going to benefit, right? By helping people. We don't help anyone by arguing with spiritually retarded lames, right? We may make a defense at times, and sometimes it's necessary because they create such an issue out of things. We have to like shut their mouths, like Paul says. But doing that all the time is just going to depress you. It depresses me, right? Like last week, we started getting off on all these different questions from these teachers of false doctrine and who can't even understand basic texts like John 8:58. And it was like the worst part of the show, right? It was like, we weren't really, it was fine. It helped us see just how low people have sunk in terms of their spiritual comprehension. They just don't have any. Like I said, they're done. They've quit, right? But they want to pretend like we've quit when we're not the ones running over to their channel lying about what the text says, right? We're just teaching it. We're like, okay, well, if there's a translation issue, we'll deal with that. But otherwise, these are all pretty clear. And this is what it says. And they can't figure it out. They get stumbled over the dumbest things. Like, where's his body? What happened to his body? Well, what happened to the angel's body? Right? They can't figure that out. They need us to help them figure that out? Really? I don't think so. I think they're just not trying to figure it out. Because all they care about is their false doctrine, their tradition. They're not interested in the right information. Right? You might think, well, how could that be? Well, look at the scribes and Pharisees of Jesus' day. Right? There's too much in it for them. There's too much to lose. Right? They don't want to be considered heretics by all the people they know. They don't want to lose their church affiliation, association, and whatever monetary benefit that might bring. Right? They don't want to have to go through the suffering that the Christ went through, and that people like you and I have to go through just to teach the right things. Just to make it easy for people to worship God. Right? Well, that's what we do. Right? Even where it concerns his name, right? We don't go forcing people to say Jehovah or Jahol or Yahweh. Right? We don't make these like big requirements and strict regulations over the pronunciation of the pronunciation language, even though we think we know how to say it. It's pretty obvious, I think, if you look at all the evidence. We just go with Jah. We speak English, so we say Jah. But even if you want to say Yah, right? They don't speak all the other names in Hebrew or Aramaic, and yet they just want to say it that way. There's nothing in the Bible that says you have to say the divine name a certain way. There's just the evidence that shows how you say it in different languages. So Jah is the least controversial, right? Okay, say Jah. Just avoid it all. You're not familiar enough with Yahweh? You don't believe it's Jehovah? We know it's not Yahweh, right? Well, then just say Jah. And yet, that's not good enough for some people. They want to continue to argue about the divine name and how to say it or whether you say it at all. So it doesn't matter sometimes how clear the evidence is. It doesn't matter how simple you make it for some people. They don't care. They just want to keep believing the way they want to believe. And when we come and teach things that are not what they believe, it bothers them. They feel threatened by it, even though we're just teaching what the texts say. It's not like we have a whole bunch of separate traditions we're trying to uphold in the name of Greg Stafford or any other human, right? It's just the Bible. It's just three things from the Bible. One God the Father. The Son of God is the Messiah sent from heaven. Pre-Christian evidence all over the place. Golden rule. Right? I mean, how much simpler do we have to make it? And that's just not good enough for most people. They want it to be complicated, right? They want to try to figure out the times and seasons, the things we're not supposed to be writing about. Explicitly, we're told we don't need anything to be written to us about those things. And yet, look at how many people want those things. That's why groups like the Watchtower, even though they've done some good, right? But they've also gone so far over the top with end-time prophecies and predictions that they've lost credibility. But that's why they thrive. Because they have all these people who continue to want them to write about things they're not supposed to be writing about. Or you get people who want to believe in the Trinity, right? Because of its historical association with the conversion of Rome into a quote-unquote Christian empire, even though Constantine was anything but a Christian, right? Even the Arch of Constantine shows that. But that's ultimately for God to decide, right? Certainly the term he contributed or used at the Council of Nicaea, homoousios, and the doctrines they developed are not biblical. They have nothing to do with the Bible. That's their own later tradition and doctrines. It's false doctrine. Right? Look at all the idols and giant images that he made of himself. You're going to follow someone like that? I don't think so. Right? Someone who says that he saw a vision of the Christ and was told to conquer in this sign, right? Makes a giant idol, tells everybody that he saw Jesus, right? Even says in the Bible, right? If anyone says there's the Christ, or see you there, or he's in his inner chamber, don't go after them. Right? So they're following these people that have such questionable historical associations and non-biblical traditions, but that's just what they've become used to. And they've been doing it for so long. They're like the Jews, the scribes and Pharisees. They could stop, but they don't want to. And sometimes for people like us who don't have those problems, we all have problems, but those aren't the problems that a lot of us have. We look at it and we think, well, why can't we solve this problem, right? Why can't we solve the problem of all this false doctrine and all this tradition? Because that's what they want to believe. They are capable of believing something else. They're capable of doing exactly what we just did. They are. Everybody is. Did we do anything Greek or Hebrew related here? No. We just read the texts that talk about these issues. And then they all fit together when you just let the text speak and then you believe them, right? You don't try to change what they mean like the way Trinitarians do with God, or deny what they say like Socinians do with the pre-existence of Christ. We just read them, and if there's no translation issue that we have to figure out, we believe them. Hey, good, we're on their way. Well, let's go start believing and teach people all these things. They're not interested in that. They have their own beliefs that they want to associate with the Bible, but that they can't. So they just lie to everybody, either knowingly or unknowingly, right? Not everybody is a knowing liar who's a Trinitarian or Socinian. They just may have been taught things and really think that's the truth. Just like with the Watchtower or other groups, right? They think it's the truth. But if they're not willing to really check it out and make sure, like Paul says, make sure of all things. Like Jesus says, if you listen to my voice, you're on the side of the truth, right? Are we really listening to what Jesus says and what the texts that he taught us say? That's what we should be concerned about. That's what we should pray for. Understanding being guided by the truth, the text. And if we believe certain things that aren't clear, that other people that believe like us don't share, right? We have the three things, but if, like I was saying earlier, if we believe differently about certain days or seasons or moons or whatever, different practices involving eating or anything else, are we strong enough to allow people to be judged by the Christ individually according to their deeds? Because I'm here to tell you, that's how they're going to be judged. That's how we're going to be judged. We just read it in several texts. So why are we judging people? Even Trinitarians, right? It's not for me to say. I can say the doctrine is false. We can all see that. But I don't know what's going on inside of a Trinitarian's mind or heart. I don't know if they're just blinded by their tradition in that sense, but that they're following God and the Christ in another sense that they'll accept that I don't know about. So I try to just back away. The less I engage with them, probably, after all, just making a defense, right? The less I engage with them, then the less likely I'm going to be to disrupt the faith they may have otherwise. So my goal as a Christian is to try to strengthen the things that remain, to try to keep people's faith alive in God, the God of the Bible, the Father, Jah, and His Son, the sent forth one, the firstborn, the beginning of His generative power, the beginning of His children, the beginning of the creation by God, and to teach the law of the Christ, to love each other and to treat each other the way we want to be treated. That's it. That's my main goal, to do those things. Everything else, it's not as really of a big deal to me. It'll fall into place. Right? Each person will choose and be judged accordingly. But if I can make a difference in those three things, then I think I'll make a difference in the most important ways when it comes to my obligation before God. So I hope this has been a good show for you all. I think we've talked about a few things, and we covered a couple subjects of great importance. The body of Christ, physical body of Christ, the relationship between the wages of sin being death, and then how we're judged in the resurrection. I hope that's been useful to you and helped you to better understand those subjects. Let's take one last look at the chat. Okay, a couple little things. Pink Moon says, a little off topic, would you ever give a book tour or give book recommendations to us? I mean, you really only need the Bible, right? If you're talking about book recommendations for getting to know the God of the Bible's where you should go. After that, you should look at other historical books like the Apocrypha, Pseudepigrapha, but you have to be a little careful. But there's certain books in the Apocrypha you should probably look at. The books of Maccabees, they provide some useful historical information regarding the Jewish period of time and in the Hellenistic world. And then, of course, different texts like First Clement, right? These will give you insight into the early Christians. I mean, modern books, that's really up to you, right? What do you like to read, right? Do you like, are you talking about history stuff? Well, then I would say you should read Josephus. You should read The War of the Jews. You should read Jewish Antiquities. You're going to find a lot of biblical material in that, a lot of biblical texts in Josephus' writings. And then, of course, the historical description of what happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD and then in the surrounding time. So I would definitely read Josephus. I would also read texts like Herodotus if you want a broader view of history over different periods of time. Works like those, I think, will give you some good historical insight into different periods of time during which the people of God also existed, and then you can compare that with what you read in the Bible. And then the rest is really up to you, Pink Moon. If you're talking about, non-fiction, fictional stuff, right, like science fiction and different novels and stuff, that's up to you. I have a couple things I like to read, but I don't want to get too off of the biblical stuff at this point. And then You also say, would you ever make a video defending Scripture alone? Well, I'm not sure really what you mean by that, right? I mean, the Bible represents the best collection of books that tell us about the history and peoples of God and the revelations of God and the wisdom of God. But there are many other historical texts that you can use that would also give you insight into different times and periods that would be very useful as well. So I'd need a little more information from you on that. But otherwise, I think we've had a good discussion. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. We'll do open session 20 next week. And then after next week's open session, I'll break from open session. We'll go back to CW Jaw Talk shows. I'd like to finish up the first 50. So I'm going to do a few pre-Christian evidence shows to add to the sub-series we have going there. And then I've got several other topics I'm going to do shows on, several that have come from you all. And we'll just keep going. I've got other videos and things I'm going to do. We'll get back to the Bible and the Trinity and conflict soon. And continue to praise the one God of the Bible, promote faith in His Son and what He taught us, so that we can continue to be one, just as He and the Father are one.